Have you ever been told you're too sensitive? That phrase. It often lands not as a gentle observation, but as an indictment, a dismissal. It's a neat, tidy box into which someone can place your feelings when they become inconvenient or too large for them to handle. You might be told you're overreacting, being dramatic, or that you need to develop a thicker skin. And for years, perhaps for a lifetime, you may have believed them. You might have tried to build walls around your heart, to numb your responses, to become the stoic, unshakable person the world seemed to demand. But what if that label, too sensitive, is one of the most profound and damaging misdiagnoses of the human condition? What if it's not a character flaw at all? What if you're not too sensitive, but instead you were just never allowed to heal? This is the distinction that can change everything. It shifts the narrative from one of personal failure to one of profound resilience. It reframes your emotional landscape not as a minefield of overreactions, but as a sacred ground where old wounds are still tender to the touch. Because that's what's really happening. When you react strongly to a seemingly small event, a critical comment, a change in tone, a perceived slight, you are likely not just reacting to the event in front of you. You are reacting with the accumulated weight of every past moment you were taught that your feelings were wrong, invalid, or unsafe. This isn't about sensitivity. This is about survival. Let's first dismantle the weapon that is the phrase too sensitive. When someone tells you this, what are they really saying? In most cases, it's a deflection. It's a way for them to avoid taking responsibility for their own impact. If you are too sensitive, then the problem lies with your reaction, not with their action. Your hurt is your fault. Your tears are your weakness. Your anger is your over-the-top drama. It absolves them of the need for empathy, for introspection, or for changing their behavior. It's a conversational and emotional stop sign, designed to end the discussion and recenter the status quo, where their comfort is more important than your pain. Think about it. Has anyone ever lovingly, compassionately, and with a genuine desire to understand you, told you that you are too sensitive? It's unlikely. The phrase is almost always deployed as a form of control, a subtle gaslighting that makes you question your own reality. Over time, this external invalidation becomes an internal one. You start to police yourself. You hear that critical voice in your own head before anyone else can say it. You feel a surge of emotion, and your first instinct is not to honor it, but to suppress it, to judge it, to apologize for it. I'm sorry. I'm just being too sensitive. You learn to abandon yourself before anyone else gets the chance. But where does this deep, reactive tenderness come from? It comes from a history of being denied the fundamental human need for emotional processing. Healing from a wound, whether physical or emotional, requires a specific set of conditions. It requires acknowledgement that the wound exists. It requires safety to express the pain. It requires time and space for the mending process to occur. It requires clean air, gentle care, and the absence of repeated injury to the same spot. For many who are labeled sensitive, their emotional upbringing provided none of these conditions. Instead, they grew up in environments where their feelings were treated as problems to be solved or silenced. Consider the child who cries after falling and is told, "You're fine. Stop crying. It's not a big deal." The message isn't one of comfort. The message is, your perception of your own pain is wrong. Your emotional response is an overreaction. Your internal reality is not to be trusted. The wound is not acknowledged. Consider the child who is angry because their boundaries were crossed by a sibling and is told, "Don't you dare use that tone with me," or "Go to your room until you can be pleasant." The legitimate feeling of anger at an injustice is punished. The child learns that anger is dangerous, that it leads to isolation and disapproval. They learn to swallow it, but it doesn't disappear. It sits in their stomach, a coiled spring of unexpressed energy, waiting for a future trigger. The pain is not given a safe outlet. Consider the child growing up in a chaotic household with emotionally volatile parents. This child doesn't have the luxury of processing their own feelings. They are too busy monitoring the emotional weather of the adults around them. They become hypervigilant, expert-level decoders of subtle shifts in tone, facial expressions, and body language. Their survival depends on anticipating the storm before it hits. This is not sensitivity. It is a finely honed threat detection system. Their nervous system is perpetually in a state of high alert. It is never allowed to rest and recover. There is no time for their own healing. In these environments, and countless others like them, the natural process of emotional healing is constantly interrupted. Every time a feeling arises, it is met with dismissal, punishment, or the needs of someone else. The emotional wound doesn't close. It doesn't scar over. It remains open, raw, and inflamed. Now, fast forward to adulthood. This person, with this collection of open emotional wounds, goes out into the world. A boss gives them some mild, constructive feedback. For someone with a history of emotional security, this is just information. They might feel a brief sting of embarrassment, but they can process it, integrate the feedback, and move on. But for the person who was never allowed to heal, this feedback doesn't land on healthy skin. It lands directly on the raw, unhealed wound of, "I am not good enough." It activates the deep-seated fear of rejection and abandonment that was conditioned into them in childhood. The emotional response is not proportional to the boss's feedback. The emotional response is proportional to the original wound. Their nervous system, wired for threat, screams danger. The ensuing flood of shame, fear, and anxiety feels overwhelming, catastrophic even. An outsider, seeing only the mild feedback and the intense reaction, might lean over and say, "Wow, don't be so sensitive," and the cycle of shame is complete. This is the core of the misunderstanding. What is perceived as oversensitivity is, in fact, a completely logical and proportional reaction to a past trauma being re-stimulated in the present. It's an emotional flashback. Your body and your nervous system are remembering a time when a similar feeling was genuinely unsafe, and they are trying to protect you. The problem isn't the size of your feelings. The problem is that you're carrying the unhealed pain of the past into every new moment. So, how does this unhealed state manifest in our daily lives? The symptoms are often mistaken for personality traits. One of the most common is hypervigilance. You walk into a room and you're not just seeing people, you're scanning them. You're reading the energy, analyzing microexpressions, listening to the cadence of conversations, trying to gauge the emotional temperature. It's exhausting. You're constantly trying to predict how people will feel or react so you can adjust your own behavior to keep the peace and stay safe. Friends might call you perceptive or intuitive, and you are, but this skill was born from a need, not a choice. It's the constant, low-level hum of a security system that never shuts off. Another is a profound and often painful empathy. You don't just understand what someone is feeling. You absorb it. Their sadness becomes your sadness. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety. This is because, as a child, you likely had to be an emotional sponge to survive. You had to feel what your caregivers were feeling to know what was coming next. Now, as an adult, you lack the protective barrier that allows you to differentiate between your emotions and the emotions of others. This can make you a wonderful friend and a caring partner, but it can also lead to chronic burnout and a feeling of being constantly overwhelmed by the world. There's also the tendency towards people-pleasing, which is often a trauma response known as fawning. If you couldn't fight your way out of a difficult situation, and you couldn't flee from it, you learned to appease the threat. You learned to be agreeable, helpful, and to anticipate the needs of others to avoid conflict and earn scraps of approval and safety. As an adult, this translates into an inability to say no. You overcommit. You sacrifice your own needs for the comfort of others. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. Setting a boundary can feel like a life-or-death situation because your nervous system remembers a time when displeasing someone had severe emotional consequences. Then there is the intense fear of rejection, sometimes referred to as rejection-sensitive dysphoria. This is when perceived or real rejection feels like an absolutely devastating, physically painful experience. It's not just disappointment. It's a soul-crushing confirmation of your deepest fear, that you are fundamentally flawed and unworthy of love. This reaction makes sense when you consider that, for a child, rejection from a caregiver is a genuine threat to survival. The unhealed part of you still believes this to be true, so you might avoid risks, stay in unhealthy relationships for too long, or preemptively push people away to avoid the unbearable pain of them leaving you first. And of course, there are the emotional floods. You feel things with an intensity that can frighten you and confuse others. A sad movie doesn't just make you tear up, it leaves you heartbroken for hours. A disagreement with a partner doesn't just feel like a conflict, it feels like the end of the world. This is not you being dramatic. This is emotional dysregulation. Your nervous system, having never been taught how to self-soothe, goes from 0 to 100 with no breaks. You are flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, and your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, goes offline. In that moment, you are not an adult having a disagreement. You are a terrified child, alone in the storm. Living this way is a constant state of walking on eggshells, not just around others, but around yourself. You become afraid of your own emotions. You see them as the enemy, as the source of your problems, because that's what you were taught. But they are not the enemy. They are messengers, distress signals from the unhealed parts of you, begging for the attention and care they were always denied. So, how do we begin to heal? How do we move from this state of raw, reactive pain to a place of integrated, resilient strength? The journey is not about becoming less sensitive. It's not about building a thicker skin. A thick skin is just scar tissue over an unhealed wound. The goal is not to feel less. The goal is to heal the wounds so that you can feel everything without being shattered by it. The first and most revolutionary step is radical self-validation. You must become the compassionate witness you never had. When a wave of emotion rises, your first job is to stop, breathe, and give it permission to exist. Instead of the old internal script of, "Oh no, here I go again, I'm overreacting," you must consciously introduce a new one. A script that sounds like, "It is okay that I am feeling this way. This feeling is real. It makes sense given my history. It is here to tell me something." Validation is not the same as agreement. You can validate the feeling of intense anger without validating the impulse to scream at someone. You can validate the profound sadness without agreeing with the thought that life is hopeless. Validation is simply acknowledging the reality of your internal experience without judgment. It is the act of saying to yourself, "I see you. I hear you. You are not wrong." This simple act is the antidote to a lifetime of being told your feelings were invalid. It's the beginning of rebuilding trust with yourself. The second step is to get to know your nervous system. Start to see your intense reactions not as a character flaw, but as a physiological response. Learn about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. Understand what triggers you. Is it a certain tone of voice? The feeling of being ignored? Criticism? When you feel that familiar surge of panic or rage or shame, learn to identify it for what it is. A nervous system activation. This depersonalizes it. It's not me being crazy. It's my nervous system trying to protect me. Once you can see it this way, you can start to work with it instead of against it. This is where somatic practices become life-changing. Somatic means relating to the body. Healing from this kind of wound isn't just an intellectual exercise. You can't think your way out of a dysregulated nervous system. You have to communicate with it in the language it understands. The language of the body. This can be as simple as placing your feet flat on the floor and really feeling the ground beneath you when you start to feel overwhelmed. It can be placing a hand on your heart and another on your belly and just breathing, feeling the gentle rise and fall. It can be slowly looking around the room and naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear. These are grounding techniques. They send a message from your body back to your brain that says, "You are here. You are in the present moment. The threat you are perceiving is not happening right now. You are safe." Learning to regulate your nervous system is how you build the container that can safely hold your powerful emotions. The third step is the practice of reparenting yourself. You have to consciously give yourself the things you didn't receive as a child. This involves nurturing your inner child, that young, vulnerable part of you where so many of these wounds reside. When you are feeling small, scared, or ashamed, imagine yourself as a wise, loving, and unconditionally accepting parent. What would that parent say to you? They would likely say, "I'm here with you. You are not alone in this feeling. It's okay to be scared. We will get through this together." They would offer comfort, not criticism. They would provide reassurance, not judgment. Speaking to yourself with this kind of internal voice can feel strange at first, but it is a powerful way to rewire the neural pathways of self-criticism and self-abandonment. Reparenting also means attending to your basic needs. Are you eating regularly? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you moving your body in a way that feels good? When we are in a state of chronic stress, we often neglect the very foundations of our well-being, which only makes our nervous system more reactive. Tending to yourself with the same care you would give to a beloved child is a radical act of healing. The fourth and often most challenging step is learning to set boundaries. Boundaries are the external expression of the internal self-worth you are building. They are the loving no that protects your energy, your time, and your emotional well-being. For someone who was trained to be a people pleaser, setting a boundary can feel like you are doing something terribly wrong. You might be flooded with guilt and fear. This is the old programming screaming for its life. The key is to start small. You don't have to start with a major confrontation. Start by saying, "I can't talk on the phone right now, but I can call you back tomorrow." Start by not immediately saying yes to a request, but instead saying, "Let me think about that and get back to you." Each small boundary you set and uphold is a message to yourself that your needs matter. It's a declaration that you are no longer willing to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You will learn that some people will not like your new boundaries. They were comfortable with the boundaryless version of you. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. The people who truly care for you will respect your need to care for yourself. Setting boundaries is the filter that shows you who those people are. Finally, the healing journey requires grieving. You must allow yourself to grieve what you lost. Grieve the childhood you didn't get. Grieve the emotional safety you deserved. Grieve the years you spent believing you were broken or too much. Grief is not self-pity. It is the honest, painful, and necessary process of acknowledging a loss. By allowing yourself to feel the sadness of what was, you create space to fully embrace what is and what can be. You cannot build a new future until you have honored the pain of the past. This is not a quick or easy process. It is the work of a lifetime. There will be days when you feel like you've taken 10 steps back. You will be triggered. You will fall into old patterns. And in those moments, the goal is not perfection. It is compassion. It is to pick yourself up, validate your struggle, and gently return to the path. And as you walk this path, something remarkable begins to happen. The label of too sensitive starts to lose its power. You begin to see your so-called sensitivity not as a liability, but as a superpower that was forged in the fire of your past. Your hypervigilance transforms into profound intuition. You can read people and situations with an accuracy that is a genuine gift. Your deep empathy, now protected by boundaries, allows you to connect with others on a level that is incredibly meaningful and healing, both for them and for you. Your intense emotional capacity, once it's held in a safe and regulated nervous system, becomes a source of incredible passion, creativity, and zest for life. You don't just see the world in black and white. You experience the full, vibrant, and sometimes painful spectrum of human existence. You are not too sensitive. You are a survivor of an environment that did not know how to handle the depth of your feeling. You developed a highly attuned nervous system as a brilliant adaptation to keep yourself safe. The work now is not to dull that system, but to teach it that the war is over. To show it that it can finally rest. So, the next time someone calls you too sensitive, or the next time that critical voice in your head tries to tell you that you are too much, you can take a deep breath and silently, or perhaps even out loud, tell yourself the truth. I am not too sensitive. I am a deeply feeling person who is learning to heal. My feelings are not my flaw, they are my guides. My tenderness is not my weakness. It is the evidence of what I have survived. And my healing is not an indulgence. It is my birthright.